Person centered expressive art therapy is a humanistic approach to counseling. It integrates the principles of Carl Rogers with various forms of creative art expression, things like dancing, drawing, sculpting, or writing. It was largely developed by Natalie Rogers, and this method suggests that everyone has an innate capacity for self healing and that the creative connection can unlock deep psychological insight through the movement between the various art forms. The creative process first involves creating a safe holding space where the client feels free to express without fear of being judged or fear of being diagnosed for their art. The therapist is there to provide a safe, supportive, and non judgmental environment by offering empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard, while the client uses art to express feelings that may otherwise be difficult to put into words. The client may start with one form of expression, such as movement or dancing. Then they might transition from movement to something like visual art, painting, clay, drawing, to give those feelings a physical form. They may then transfer tra- they may then transition into journaling or poetry to try to find the words for the images they created. But there's no set path to take. The client can draw, paint, write, or dance in any order. The point is each the point is each shift in media acts as a catalyst to peel back the layers of the psyche until core insight or emotional release is reached. The goal is not the product of the creative process, but the creative process itself. The insight occurs when the client reflects on what they expressed and finds personal meaning from it, focusing on the mind, body, and spirit, and addressing the person as a whole rather than just focusing on the cognitive symptoms. This is an important topic to the counseling field because it bridges the gap between traditional talk therapy and the subconscious. It's important for accessing the inaccessible emotions or feelings that many traumas or complex emotions store in parts of the brain that aren't easily accessible through language, through language alone. Expressive art provides a sort of backdoor to these feelings, and it provides an empowerment and autonomy, unlike some other clinical approaches where the therapist interprets everything about the client's art and tries to provide a diagnosis. But this allows the client to be the only expert of their own art, which fosters a sense of agency and self trust. It is also very versatile across populations and is particularly effective with children or adolescents and or individuals with communication barriers or those who are just stuck intellectualizing their problems during talk therapy. Person-centered expressive art therapy can be integrated with cognitive behavioral therapy, and they can complement each other very well. It could work especially well if the clients are apprehensive about the homework portion of CBT. Instead of the standard CBT homework, a client could use a daily creative journal or art project to track their moods or cognitive triggers. When the client is stuck intellectualizing problems, the expressive arts can help bypass that defensiveness. Once the emotion is expressed through art, CBT tools can then be applied to analyze the core beliefs that surface during the creative process. Instead of simply writing down the cognitive distortions, expressive art can be used to visualize it. The client could then be asked to externalize their thoughts by drawing or sculpting their reoccurring negative thoughts or feelings. The client could then be asked to visualize the alternative once the negative thought or feeling is externalized. and then use a different medium, like watercolor or movement, to represent a more rational belief. The cultural consideration I think about is age, because the developmental stages are significant influences to our interactions with creative media and the therapeutic process. For children and adolescents, creative expression comes naturally, especially since they may lack the vocabulary to vocalize complex emotions or trauma. It can give children and adolescents a sense of autonomy and agency since they tend to struggle with authority. And person centered expressive art therapy is a safe place for them to explore their autonomy in a safe and productive way. On the other hand, on the other hand, adults have gone through years of conditioning, so they may be a little more apprehensive with an internalized belief that they are not creative enough or are bad at art. So, person centered expressive art therapy and the safe holding space it should create can act as a regulator by using the body to process stress that hasn't been verbalized. An, ethi- an ethical consideration is when working with cognitive disabilities or decline of any kind. For example, working with Alzheimer's patients requires creative activities to not feel too childish or too difficult. A balance of clinical goals and deep empathy are mandatory to ensure clients never feel forced to participate. Alzheimer's patients are in a very vulnerable state of cognitive decline, very vulnerable stages of cognitive decline. This means the therapist must be very careful to balance the clinical goals while maintaining empathy. The therapist should always continuously look out for the patient's willingness to continue to participate. Forcing anyone to participate would be a violation of their personal dignity. And just like any client therapist relationship, there's a power imbalance to keep in mind and to not take advantage of, especially when the client is unable to advocate for themselves properly. I don't believe anyone in the world would like to be forced to color or play with Play-Doh. And that would just be very counterproductive to what the therapy is trying to accomplish. A key, a key takeaway is the autonomy of all clients, not just Alzheimer's patients. Um, the autonomy of all clients, not just Alzheimer's patients, should be considered when diving into expressive art therapy of any kind. Trust and rapport are the foundation and should always be upheld and respected. The client should always have a say in the therapeutic process. Just because a therapist likes to start with dancing or movement doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to be comfortable starting with dancing or movement. So it's important for the therapist to just listen and pay attention to the needs of the individual rather than sticking to any one size fits all regimen. Something I've learned through this course is that there is an endless combination of possibilities when exploring different kinds of therapy styles, not even just expressive art therapy, which also has many different avenues to explore. And I think it's very important to keep an open mind to all of them and not get caught up on any one style or way of doing things. I also think it's very important to try and stay up to date with the latest research. And remember, we only know a fraction of what there is to learn about the human psyche. People are individuals with individual needs, so what works for one person may not work for another. Therapists should always work on building rapport and trust because clients will feel a lot more comfortable exploring things that might make them uncomfortable while being safe. My biggest takeaway this semester is identifying how to grow and be uncomfortable while still being safe.